Hi there! Today I want to talk to you about the differences between adopting older kids versus adopting a toddler so that you can figure out which type of adoption is right for your family. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. You are near and dear to my heart. I'm so glad that you have found my video once again in your subscription box. And if you are new to my channel, hello, my name is Katie and I'm a foster adoptive mom of 3 kids. At the time of filming this, our kids are 10, 6, and 3 years old. Our youngest daughter was placed with us at about 18 months old, so she was in that toddler, kind of between baby toddler phase, and then our older 2 kids were placed with us when they were 5 and 9. So we do have experience fostering and adopting in both of these age ranges. And let me tell you, they're 2 pretty different experiences. So today I want to not only just share pros and cons of each type of adoption, but also share a little bit about our specific experience so that you can get an idea of what it's like in real life on a day-to-day basis. Before we jump in, I just want to say if you are not subscribed yet to my channel, please subscribe and you can hit the notification bell. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button so that other people can find this video. It really helps more than you know. I also just want to preface this by saying that my experience is not going to be the same as everyone else's experience. Obviously, a lot of it depends on the kid's background, maybe whether you're adopting from foster care, or you're adopting internationally. All of those things can really play a big part, but I just want to give you my perspective on it because I am an adoptive parent, I've lived through it. Now in our specific situation, all 3 of our kids were waiting children in the foster care system. So this means that they were waiting to be adopted, but their foster family, for one reason or another, was not able or not willing to go through with an adoption. They were just interested in being a foster family. There's actually a lot of kids in the United States in this situation, and most people don't know that you can actually adopt waiting children without having to go through the process of fostering kids for years and years before a case may become open for adoption. So I did make a video about how to adopt waiting children from foster care, so I will link that above and I will link it below in the down bar. Now for what you really came here for. Let's talk about adopting toddlers versus adopting older kids. I want to start with the pros and cons of adopting a toddler. I think that most people, when they first start dreaming about adoption or thinking about adoption, they're typically imagining themselves adopting an infant or adopting a toddler. They don't really like the idea necessarily of adopting older kids. Obviously there are, outliers in the situation, but I know even for my husband and I, when we first thought about adoption, we never would have considered adopting older kids. We would have said like the oldest kid we'd want to adopt is maybe 3 or 4. And our plans changed. I think a lot of people believe that if you adopt a baby or a toddler, that they're not going to have any trauma, they're not going to remember anything, and it's going to be just as if you had given birth to them. And I'm just here to tell you that that could not be further from the truth. They may not remember like on a mental level that they can explain it to you, but their bodies remember what happens, and they will have trauma even if they're adopted as a newborn, because that loss and separation from a parent will cause trauma. So I don't want people to go into adopting a toddler or even a baby thinking that they're going to be exempt from all of the baggage and things that can come from traumatic experiences. You may not see as many traumatic experiences, but that first loss of the birth parent is still going to be a big deal, which you'll kind of see as I'm talking through the pros and cons. So let's start with the positives, the pros of adopting a toddler, because there really are a lot of good things about adopting toddlers. One of the biggest things that I think is a benefit of adopting toddlers is that you have fewer unknown experiences that the kid has gone through. So, they're not that old. You know that they've had separation from their birth parent. They may have moved houses a few times. It just depends on their situation. But even if they have all these experiences, they don't have 10 years worth of experiences that you don't know about. They have maybe a year or 2 years of experience in life that you don't really know exactly what happened. So there's a little bit less unknown in that sense. This also means that they are less likely to have moved from one home to another. Now, I have heard stories of toddlers who have been adopted who were in like 10 homes within the first 2 years of their life. And that is just truly heartbreaking to me because that really is not healthy for any kid, especially a kid that age, to not be able to form a strong bond or attachment with a caregiver. But you're less likely to have that situation if you're adopting a toddler, because chances are they haven't been moved around as much as a kid who's like 7 years old. Another fun thing, and I think this is what most people think of when they consider adopting a toddler as a positive, is that you get to have a lot of firsts with them. I know for a lot of parents, like being there for the first steps, for the first words, all of those things are really special moments when you're a parent and you want to experience that with your kid. And obviously, if you're adopting an older kid, they've already taken their first steps, said their first words, most likely, and so you won't have those firsts. But with a toddler, you get a lot of firsts with them, and that is really special to be able to be a part of that. I will also say that parenting a toddler, not always, but could feel a bit more natural if you've adopted a toddler versus an older kid, simply because physical touch is such an important part of bonding, and especially with children, that's very important that they get physical touch. And for toddlers, it's very natural to hug and cuddle, and you're changing their diaper. There are a lot of physical things that you're doing in order to bond with them, and so it can make that bonding process maybe a little bit quicker, or maybe just at least, if not quicker, it feels a bit more natural, because you know, it's normal to be touchy and cuddly and lovey with a toddler like that. And then the last pro that I want to talk about is the fact that your child, if they're a toddler, they're going to grow up understanding that they're adopted, and it's going to be somewhat quote unquote normal for them. I'm hesitant to say that because I know that adoption in and of itself is just not a normal thing. Like, what's normal and natural in many ways is for that child to be able to stay with their birth family. But when that's not possible, you know, adoption happens. And I think it can be good because the kid from a young age knows they're adopted. They know, you know, there's something special and different about that. And you can kind of educate them from the time they're a kid and be open and honest with them so that it's less shocking or crazy to them that they're adopted. They'll just kind of grow up being like, well, I'm adopted. And that's not to say they won't struggle with it, which is what we'll get to later, but they will be used to it, if that makes sense. All right, the cons. And before I start this, I just want to tell you that our toddler adoption was very, very difficult for me. And, you know, now we've had our daughter for 2 years and we're in a much, much different place than we were at the start. But I experienced a lot of really challenging, hard days with our toddler adoption. And I think that was surprising to a lot of people because, as I said, people think adopting a toddler comes without all this baggage and all this trauma and all this stuff, but it's still there. And so it does have an effect, and it does make parenting a toddler very challenging. So I'll explain kind of some of my cons that I have, and then I'll also explain a little bit about my specific experience. So the first thing I'll say is that the toddler age, no matter whether you're an adoptive parent or your biological parent, toddlers are difficult. Yes, they are cute. Yes, they are adorable. They're fun to be around sometimes, but parenting toddlers is hard work. They're constantly testing you. They're constantly trying your patience. They're constantly doing things they should not do, and they're also still very reliant on you for so many things, but they don't want your help. They want to do things by themselves, and they want to try things, they want to say no, and so just developmentally, that age is challenging to parent. If you're a parent, can I get an amen in the comments? Because toddlers, as adorable as they are, they're just hard to parent. And so if you're parenting a toddler who's being adopted and being ripped away from everything they know and love, you can imagine how that could be extra challenging and extra difficult. So kind of connected to this, I think one of the biggest struggles of adopting a toddler is that they're not old enough for you to really explain the concept of adoption to them or foster care or anything like that, and it's so hard for them to know what is happening. All they know is that you are not the right person. There was someone else taking care of them before who they loved and were attached to, hopefully. And all of a sudden, you're coming and you're ripping them away from all of that. And you're a stranger. Maybe they've met you a handful of times, maybe not. You're a stranger coming and taking them, and oftentimes they will never see that caretaker ever again. Now, in our situation, we have actually visited my daughter's old foster mother before and foster father. We've been able to maintain a relationship with them, and that has been really great. But still, in those first months, they're like, when am I going to see these people again? But they don't have the words to tell you, I'm scared, I miss my foster mom, all these things. They're just going to scream and hit you and bite you and cry because they don't know what's going on and they're confused and they're sad. So, and obviously I know this, I know someone's going to come in the comments and be like, that was just your experience, blah, blah, blah. I have people do that sometimes and I'm kind of like, well, obviously that's my experience, but I also don't think that that experience has been limited to me. I think there are a lot of parents of adopted toddlers who have gone through this, where their toddler is just very difficult because they have all these feelings and they don't know how to control them. And that can, you know, come across in different ways, but at the end of the day, this kid has experienced trauma and they're not attached to you securely yet. I also think with toddlers, something that's really hard, and I will say this could be true of any age, but with toddlers, I find it extra difficult to know what is trauma behavior and what is just normal toddler disobedience and testing the limits. As I said, toddlers love to say no, they love to disobey, they love to try new things and all these things. But it is hard to know what is just them being a toddler and what is them kind of crying out for more love and support and crying out because they're confused or acting out because they're angry and they miss their old foster parents or even their orphanage. Another big worry for me with toddlers, and again, this could happen with older kids as well, but it is very possible that this child never got the important bonding moments that they needed to have with their birth mother. That skin-to-skin contact, that being cared for, they may never have received that. And they're going to be hesitant to take that from you at first. You may have a kid who you try to hug them or love them and they push you away. Obviously, a lot of that depends on like their attachment style and things like that, but that is a common scenario. And so that bonding with their birth mom is really important for their future development, and they may not have gotten that because they were adopted at such a young age. Whereas an older child who maybe wasn't removed from their parents' home until they were older, yes, they may have experienced more abuse or neglect, but they also may have gotten some more of that infant bonding time, which is really important for development. And then the last thing, I did talk about in the pros that your child will grow up kind of knowing about adoption and it will be kind of a quote-unquote normal thing to them. But I will say that as when the kid is younger, they'll probably be like, oh yeah, I'm adopted, it's a more normal thing. But then oftentimes what I have found, and I try to follow and listen to a lot of adoptees and hear their perspectives and their stories, especially like I follow people on Instagram or on YouTube and try to hear about their perspective, because obviously my kids are adoptees and they're going to grow up and have feelings as well. So I want to understand as well as I can. And from my experience, most of the adoptees who are really struggling more with the concept of being adopted were adopted as infants or as toddlers. I think that's because there's a big loss of identity when you're adopted as a baby or a toddler, because you never got that time with your birth family to really get to know them and to feel like you understand where you came from, or you may even have situations where they don't remember their parent at all if they're a toddler. They may not even have a picture of them, so they'll always wonder, what were my parents like? And I do find that a lot of people who were adopted as infants or toddlers, they really struggle with their identity and feel a lot of anger and resentment sometimes about being adopted when they're older. So that doesn't always happen, but it could happen. And I could understand why someone might feel that way if they never got that experience. We went through at least a year where my daughter was constantly rejecting me. And she did it to my husband as well, but not to the same level she did it with me. And that's very common, that they're more likely to push away the mother because they've had more experiences with mothers and abandonment, and sometimes dads weren't there to begin with. And so that was definitely true of us. When I was on maternity leave with her, we spent a ton of time together, and I will say those were some of the darkest days of my life. That sounds terrible because I was so happy to have her and it was exactly what I wanted, but man, she had so much trouble just attaching and trusting. And I think I don't think that my agency like didn't prepare me for that, but I feel like most of our training was surrounded around older children adoption because that's more common. But it was kind of uncommon for us to be matched with a toddler so young. So all of our training was about how to deal with trauma in like slightly older kids, and I felt pretty confident with that. But when it came to toddlers, I was like, I don't know what is her just being a toddler and what's her, this is like as a trauma response, because I've never even had a kid before. She was our first kid. And so that was a big struggle for me. And that lasted for a long time. And I had to work through that. And during that time, I really struggled with like post-adoption depression, which is very similar to postpartum depression. And there's just not a lot known about it. And so I felt so isolated in that. And I felt further isolated because when you adopt a toddler, everyone's like, oh, well, that's easy. Like, you're so lucky that you got a little kid and you don't have to adopt an older kid with all these other problems. And so those comments, while they were meant to be helpful and encouraging, actually kind of silenced me and made me feel like I had no right to be feeling the way I was feeling. That was really challenging for me. I actually made a video about post-adoption depression, actually 2 videos. So one is about kind of like signs of it, and then the second one is about how to overcome it. So many people experience it, but they don't talk about it, because I've had countless messages, DMs, comments on my video saying I was feeling this way and I thought I was totally alone. So I just want to say, if you're feeling that way, I'm going to link the video above. I'm also going to link it below. Check it out and just know that you're not alone in those feelings. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It doesn't mean you don't love your children. It just means you're struggling. This is all very new and it's very difficult. It took us about a year to get through that really difficult point before we turned a corner, and it felt so much more natural, and it was just interesting how time will do that even. And so that was really helpful once we passed that milestone. And now that we're 2 years in, I feel like it's much more similar to biological parenting. Obviously, it has its differences, but it is a lot less intense now than it used to be. And I've really loved being able to experience a lot of firsts with our daughter, and I've loved being able to see her just grow and develop. And even, you know, when I went into adoption, I never expected that my kids were gonna grow up and be like me, because we're not biologically related. I didn't want to expect that of them, but it's been really cool to see our daughter like pick up some of our little traits and quirks and things, and even like our sense of humor, some of our habits. Like, we read a lot and she reads, and it's just been really cool to see that. And I think that's kind of unique to toddler or infant adoption, whereas like older kids who already have been formed a lot in their personality and their likes and dislikes, you're not going to see that as much. So it's been kind of fun to have that experience that I just wasn't expecting to have it all. All right, now on to older kid adoption. So when we first went into adoption, as I said, we were not interested in adopting older kids at all. But as we went through our training and we talked to our social workers, we slowly started inching our way up on the age range, inching and inching and inching. And they just have a way of convincing you that you should adopt an older kid. We actually said we would be willing to take kids from 0 to 10, and we were open to taking up to 3, or maybe we said up to 4 kids. We were crazy. I'm really glad we didn't take up to 4 kids at a time, but bless you if that's what you want to do. It's been very different parenting a 6 and 10-year-old, and I would argue I've handled it a lot better than parenting a toddler. So that might surprise some of you, but I don't know if it's because it's our second adoption and we're just a little bit more experienced, but I feel like it's more than that. To me, parenting older kids has been a lot more natural, and I know that's not true for everyone. It's my experience. I do work with older kids. I'm a teacher and I work with 6th graders through 10th graders. And so I am used to older kids and I do enjoy that age range. And even though our kids are younger than that, they're not like babies and toddlers, and I just find it so much easier. The first thing about adopting what I will call school age children, so like our kids are younger, like elementary age kids. The first thing that's really helpful is that you often know a lot more about older kids and their cases than you would about a little kid who you were being matched with, like a toddler. So for example, if they have any diagnoses, oftentimes they've already been diagnosed with that, especially if they've been in foster care in the US foster system. They've probably been to therapy before. They may have gotten an IEP at school already. In our case too, the social workers had a lot of information on both kids, and I got to call them and ask them a ton of questions before we even agreed to meet them. And so I knew a lot about their story, about their case, and I was able to decide better if we could be a good fit for these kids, if we would be able to provide them with what they needed. Another thing I love about slightly older kids is like they're so much more independent. And I'm saying that while also knowing that kids who have been through trauma are going to be more dependent than most kids their age would be if they had not been through all that trauma. But still, compared to a toddler or a baby, I'm like, they can use the bathroom by themselves. That is one less stressor to worry about. They can sometimes make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich by themselves. Like, they're able to get in and out of their beds by themselves and in and out of their chair. And it just kind of made me realize how like physically demanding raising a toddler is versus school-age kids. I feel like a lot less needed for every single activity. And that has been nice for me, at least. I think I enjoy that my kids are a little more independent. They can handle some things on their own, and then I can just enjoy time with them more, doing fun things without always having to take care of every little thing they do. I also find it way easier to read older kids. Like, you know, if my daughter is just struggling with something or she's grumpy about something, I can often guess what it's about. I won't say too high of a percentage, but I'd say like 70 to 80% of the time, I can pinpoint like why she's acting a certain way and like the reason behind a behavior, whereas with my toddler, I struggled with that. So it's easier for me to tell what they're feeling and why they're feeling that way, which makes my next point, there's a lot more clarity in how to talk to them about things. Because if I know that they're acting this way because they were triggered by the fact that they saw, you know, this dog that reminded them of a dog they used to have, I can talk to them about that and I can understand where they're coming from and why they're acting out. It's so much more clarity. And I will say, I think talking with kids through different situations is a strength of mine, but I also think it's just a little bit easier when they're a little older. I also find it a lot easier to set clear consequences for if a behavior expectation is not met or they've done something they know they shouldn't have done. You can very easily come up with the consequence and they'll feel the pain of that, and it can help change behavior a little bit, like taking away the tablet or adding an extra chore or something like that. Those kids that age understand consequences and why they have them, and we have seen that be effective. And so that is something that is a lot easier than a toddler, where you're like, what are you gonna tell your toddler? I mean, you can only put them in timeout so many times, right? And I would say that another pro is that, and I'm hesitant to say this as well, as I was in the last part, but I do think that kids who are adopted at an older age, they tend to actually remember a lot of the trauma they've experienced, and they kind of know the alternative to living with you. And so they may struggle with the idea of adoption at first a lot, but as they get older, oftentimes they struggle with that a little bit less than someone who was adopted really, really young, because they still remember what it was like living with their birth parents, and maybe there was neglect or abuse. And that's not to say they might not run right back to them when they turn 18. That could happen. There are no guarantees. I know families who have kids who were like 18 and they were adopted and they ran right back into the really bad situation with their birth families again. And it doesn't matter, that could always happen. But I'm just saying, I typically find that the adoptees who were adopted at an older age typically don't struggle as much with identity problems as the ones who were adopted as infants, who are just completely out of touch with their first families and don't really feel connected to their culture or things like that. So that's just something I'll throw in there. And you might disagree with me, but I'm just basing it off of what I've read and seen and experienced from people I know. And I just want to throw this in as another pro, is that it's not as bad as people make it sound. If you tell your family or your friends that you're thinking of adopting a 10-year-old, they might be like, are you crazy? What if that kid has a million problems? What if they try to set your house on fire? Because every single person that you will talk to will have a horror story about adoption. Whether it's a younger kid or an older kid, you can easily find horror stories about adoption. I mean, you can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean that that's what it's always like. And in our situation, yeah, our kids struggle and there are struggles that we have with them, but man, it's really not as bad as it is for some people. You know, there's the minority of people where there can be something really truly terrible that happens, and then there's a majority where things are hard and things are challenging, but it's still totally manageable and doable. So the first con, though, of adopting older kids is that there are so many different types of trauma or abuse or neglect that these kids could have gone through, and you have no clue about some of them because maybe that kid has not ever disclosed that, and it's possible they've been like in a foster system or in an orphanage for a long amount of time, and who knows the many, many things that could have happened to them over those many years of not being with a family. And even outside of traumatic experiences, there's just a lot of regular experiences that you have no clue what they've been through, and they may have a lot of triggers about things, and you'll be like, why are they triggered by this? Like, why are they acting this way? When really it has to do something with an experience they've had in the past that you have no clue about yet, because you have like 6 to 10 years of experiences you've never been with them for. So that is very challenging. Again, because they're older, it's very possible that they have been passed around to different caregivers more often, maybe moved around to different homes. They may have experienced more separation and loss than a kid who was younger because they've experienced loss again and again, rather than just like the first time that they were, you know, placed in care. So that can be very challenging, and oftentimes too, if they've been passed around a lot, they will have attachment issues because they've never had that secure, stable attachment with one caregiver, and so it's going to take time for them to build that up with you. I also find that when this happens, there often is a bigger struggle with boundaries as well with older kids. So if a kid has grown up and they've been passed from adult to adult their whole life, they might just not know a stranger. Like, and this can happen with toddlers too. Our daughter was like this a little bit, but you can train a toddler a little bit easier to realize that's not okay. Whereas like with older kids, if they've been with all these different adults their whole life, it's going to feel normal for them to instantly be like clinging to a new adult, even if that's not a healthy idea. And so it's going to be hard for them to recognize you as like you're the parent, and there's different levels of relationships between you and them them and other adults, whether it's in your family and your friend circle. That can be really challenging. And depending on the type of abuse that they have gone through, there can also be boundary issues with like the opposite sex, or just boundary issues in general, like just not knowing how to, maybe not having some of the social skills because they weren't taught things by their first family, or they moved around so much they didn't learn a lot of things that most kids would have learned. So that can be very challenging. I know I mentioned that it's kind of good to have the diagnoses, but maybe if you get an older kid and they have a ton of diagnoses, it can feel really overwhelming. And so you see all these things that kind of scare you away, like all these letters that you're like, ADHD, GAD, you know, you might be like, what are these things? This is really stressful to me. So that can be a challenge as well. Another thing is that for kids who've experienced trauma, their emotional age and their actual age are very different things. So, you know, your kid may be 7 years old in actuality, but they may be, I don't know, 4 years old emotionally because they've been neglected. They haven't gotten that bonding they needed. And so you'll find that the way they react to things is much more like a 4-year-old than like a 7-year-old. And you have to adjust your expectations, and it can really feel like you're babying them a lot. And it's confusing to know what to expect from them. I will also say that when you're adopting an older kid, they sometimes come to you with a very unrealistic view of what a family will be like. It's a very idealistic, like, once I get a family, everything will be perfect. There'll be no rules, there'll be no expectations, I'll get to do fun things all the time. We definitely face that with our older kids. They were so looking forward to being a part of a normal family, but a lot of times normal family is defined by what they see on TV, like cartoons and stuff, and they think you're just going to be going on vacations all the time and having parties and not having all these rules about things. And so that can be challenging to have to kind of be like, sorry, we're not perfect, and you can't just have your way all the time just because you're in a family now. Like, that's not really how it works. And that can be really disappointing for those kids. And it can be very challenging for you to try to be living up to those expectations. I also find that with one of our kids in particular, who has lived with a lot of different adults in their lifetime, there is this expectation of me as the mother to be every mother that they've ever had. I need to be the mother I am, which is a full-time working mother who keeps my house relatively clean, who cooks dinners, who, you know, takes them on vacations, who takes them to activities, and who is pretty active in my church and all these things. I need to be that person. But I also need to be their old foster mom who used to sit on the couch with them all the time and watch TV and cuddle. And I also need to be the bio mom who just bought them food all the time, like 2 adult meals from Burger King. Not that I'm being specific, but 2 adult meals from Burger King and let you eat them. Well, I can't be all of those things, but there can be a pressure to feel like you're not measuring up to their standards or their expectations, and you are disappointing them. Like, it's just, the reality is you're disappointing them, even if those expectations aren't realistic. And that can be hard to deal with when you feel like I'm giving so much and they're not going to be grateful, okay? Like, it doesn't matter that they have experienced way lower standards than what you're giving them. They will probably not be grateful. And I don't think we should expect them to be. It can be hard. It can be hard because their expectations are so skewed that they won't be grateful. They'll just want more. And from what I've heard, that's a pretty common experience. So now for my experience. As I mentioned earlier, this time around has been a lot better, I think. I mean, I have still struggled greatly. I just struggle with anxiety in general, and my anxiety is like very heightened because I know my kids have anxiety issues and they're in a new situation and they're adjusting, and I want them to do well, and I worry about their futures, and I worry with my oldest, like, are we gonna have enough time to help her in the ways I want to help her and help her grow and kind of like make up for some of the things that happened in her past. And I know I can't fix everything, but there is worry there. There's a lot of worry this time around that wasn't there as much with our younger daughter. With her, it was more isolation and feeling really lonely and feeling kind of ashamed for struggling. And in this case, I feel like people totally understand why I would be struggling, because adopting older kids is kind of viewed as like, whoa, you're a saint, you're crazy. And I definitely am not a saint. I might be crazy. To me, adopting older kids has felt a little bit easier, but like I said, that could just be because it's my second time around and adopting. But I also really think that I just handle older kids a little bit better. They don't need me quite as much. Like, I'm just not one of those moms. I know a lot of moms like this, and I always feel bad that I'm not this type of person, but a lot of moms are like, oh no, my kid is walking. Oh no, my kid can feed themselves now. Oh no, they can go to the bathroom now. Like, I'm so sad that they won't need me anymore. And to me, I'm like, great, like, it's working. The goal is independence. The goal is that we're training them up so that they can do these things by themselves, and it's one less thing I have to worry about. And so older kids, the fact that they can do a little bit more on their own really frees me up. Like, our kids, our 2 older ones, they can like get themselves up in the morning, and we have like a little breakfast bar and they can get their own breakfast. And, you know, it's just like nice that they can do that. It just takes some of the stress away. So that is something I have appreciated about having older kids. I also find it a lot easier for me to talk through things with older kids, and that part has been easier. And yeah, I would just encourage you, if you're scared off by adopting older kids, like, don't be, explore it. And so much of it depends on what the kid has been through, any diagnoses they have. All those things will inform you more about whether or not you could be a good fit for that kid. I always try to encourage people to be a little more open, because you just never know. And for us, even though it has been really hard, and I don't want to pretend it hasn't, if you're curious, you can watch some of my adoption update videos. I'm pretty brutally honest with how difficult it's been, but I just think that's the nature of foster care and adoption, and it's not going to be easy. You're putting together a family from all these different places and different backgrounds, and that can be messy. So it's not going to be perfect, but I do think there's so many benefits to it, and really, you never know. An older kid could be a great fit for your family. So why not be open to it and then see? You can always say no. that's something that maybe I need to make a video about, that it's okay to say no to placements. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you can't take care of a kid. I'm not saying just take whatever, you know, case comes your way, but I'm saying maybe be more open on the front end and be more selective on the other side of it. So there you have it. That is my comparison of adopting a toddler versus adopting an older kid. If it was helpful to you in any way, if you can click the thumbs up button, that would be super helpful to help more people find this video and figure out what type of adoption is right for them. It has been so long since I've sat down and actually done a sit-down adoption video, but I really like doing these, so I am planning to do some more in the upcoming weeks about different adoption topics. I also would like to do another adoption update, how we are doing at this point. We are like 8 months into the process of a legal risk adoptive placement, and a lot of big things have happened lately in the case, and we're just waiting and crossing our fingers for the next step. So you can be looking for an update coming your way soon, and also a couple more topical adoption videos like this to help people who are on their adoption journey. If any of that interests you, please hit the subscribe button, and also you can click the bell, which will notify you anytime that I post a new video. I typically post videos on Thursdays, but sometimes I may do an extra one, especially in the summer, which is coming up so soon, so you don't want to miss out on any of those videos. And if you have any topic ideas, I have a pretty big list right now, but if there's anything specifically that you would love to see a video on adoption-wise, put it in the comments below and I will check it out. That's all for today, and I hope you have an awesome week.